Hello again, you're with BBC News. I'm Sally Bundock. Time now for the top business stories. China aims to grow its economy by 5% this year, its lowest target for more than 3 decades, as it looks to bounce back from the pandemic blues. Foxconn considers swapping China for India. According to reports, the company behind Apple's iPhones is about to go on a huge hiring spree in southern India. Are you struggling to find your five a day? The co-founder of Leon blames a weird supermarket culture for the UK's veg shortage. And Double Trouble will tell you about the twins who plan to mix it with the heavyweights by shaking up the UK's premium drinks industry. So let's get down to business, and we begin with China. It's currently holding its annual 2-day National People's Congress and has set out its economic forecast for the year. Premier Li Keqiang told a packed audience in Beijing on Sunday that the government hoped to achieve economic growth of around 5% in 2023. This figure is in line with what most analysts were predicting. But last year, successive strict lockdowns slowed China's growth. Official figures show the world's second biggest economy grew by just 3% last year, which was way below the government target of 5.5%, and its slowest growth for decades. Well, let's talk this through with Louise Liu, senior economist at Oxford Economics. Good morning to you, Louise. So they're looking at a 5% target for this year. Your thoughts?
Look, I think 5% is very much anticipated by markets. The around 5% language that we see probably implies that growth as low as 4.5% is probably acceptable to the government. And we do think that that means that the policy measures that we see this year will be a little bit more conservative than we expect last year.
But this is a new era we're seeing in China, isn't it? Because, you know, years ago, pre-pandemic, it was double-digit growth. Now we're looking at just 5%. So what does that mean for China and the global economy?
I think that just means that going forward, China won't be a big driver of global growth anymore. And what that means domestically for China is that, you know, in the past, as you said, we've enjoyed growth that are sort of in the double digits. And a lot of that is driven by investments, is driven by exports. And going forward, those two wouldn't be as much a growth driver for China anymore. So what that means domestically is that China will have to find its own new growth drivers going forward. And hopefully that comes from consumption, which is what the government expects and hopes that the growth transition model will point to.
Now, when it comes to the leadership in China, there was a big shake-up expected in the team that's handling the economy. Much more control from the centre. Is that what we've seen so far?
Yes, I think a lot of signs are pointing towards the fact that not just people changes, but also institutional reforms that do point to more centralized, more party control. And of course, we will get more details on some of these reforms towards the end of this week when the NPC officially ends. But I think signs are pointing towards the fact that we might see a further consolidation in the financial system. We might see a further consolidation in the different ministries, as well as some of these top government posts may be well filled by, perceived allies of President Xi.
We've already seen quite strict controls of the tech sector in China. Is that set to continue?
I think to the extent that it doesn't undermine growth, the government will be looking at easing some of these policies that he's put in place over the last few years. I think it would be mindful of the fact that some of these heavy-handed crackdowns have actually impacted growth over the last few years. So I think going forward, we are likely to see more targeted easing, perhaps looking at supporting some of these smaller companies that could contribute to the country's self-sufficiency in the areas of technology, while controlling or at least governing some of these bigger monopolistic tech companies.
OK, Louise, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Louise Liu there, senior economist at Oxford economics. Well, let's stay with China because one company potentially looking to move some of its operations out of the country is Foxconn. According to various reports, the Taiwanese firm which makes Apple's iPhones is considering moving some of its production to India. On Friday, the southern Indian state of Karnataka said Foxconn had announced a major deal there which could generate 100,000 jobs over the next decade. Last year, Foxconn's operations in China were hit by supply chain problems due to the country's strict COVID lockdowns. Well, let's go live to our bureau in Delhi to get the lowdown on this from our India business correspondent, Arunodai Mukherjee. Arunodai, there's a lot of speculation about this. What are you hearing?
Well, there is, and it all started when last week, around Thursday and Friday, when we saw several reports that said that Foxconn was looking to invest nearly $700 million in India, which would lead to the creation of about 100,000 jobs. This also came in the week in which we saw the chairman of Foxconn visit India and meet the Prime Minister, as well as several other big political leaders from different states as well, talking about investments. But over the weekend, what we do know is that a statement had been issued by Foxconn in which they said that nothing definitive or binding or any kind of agreement had been arrived upon as far as any new investment was concerned. They, however, did say that there were internal negotiations that were going on, there were reviews going on, but nothing binding had been agreed upon. They also said that this figure of $700 million in investment is something that is being quoted by the media, but they have not divulged any information about any kind of figures at the moment. And they also importantly pointed out that this figure of 100,000 jobs is not going to be are not going to be direct jobs created by Foxconn. So we're still waiting for some more clarity on that. But the only clarification that came was from the head of the state government of Karnataka, and he tweeted to say that they have earmarked a massive plot of land near the Bangalore airport for this supposed project, and it is going to lead, and he said it's going to lead to the creation of about 100,000 jobs in the state.
OK, well, let's unpack that a little further then. You know, in this state, that's a huge hiring spree that could be taking place in the next few years. So do they have that level of skilled workers there?
Well, that's something that will be clarified, I'm guessing, in the next few months when we get a little more detail about what kind of jobs they will be, really. But having said that, Bangalore as a city, or now known as Bengaluru as a city, has always been seen as the big IT hub of the country, the big tech sort of capital of the country. In fact, it is also many times known as the Silicon Valley of India. So that's the tag that the city of Bengaluru has always had. And we've seen the city attract several investments from domestic as well as international tech companies. And this is yet another example which the state of Karnataka, in which Bangalore is trying to really capitalize upon. It is also significantly a state, Sally, which is going to be going to elections. So that's why you're seeing a lot of chatter from politicians talking about this 100,000 job creation, because it's important as well for them to reach out to the voters to display their efforts in an election year. So all these factors need to be considered when we're talking about this kind of a big project. But yes, fact is that land has been earmarked for this particular project, and Foxconn, which manufactures Apple's iPhones in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu, already has been looking to increase its footprint in India, because Apple only has a market share of about 4% in the country. But the mobile market in India is still dominated by the much more affordable Chinese brands, and this is a way in which they're looking to increase their footprint, and especially in a climate where the Indian government has doled out several financial incentives to companies like Foxconn in the recent past.
OK, Arunodai, interesting. Thank you. Arunodai Mukherjee there with the latest on that story. Let's now bring you some other business news. Twitter insiders have told the BBC the company is no longer able to protect users from trolling following layoffs and changes under owner Elon Musk. Current and former employees of the firm told BBC Panorama standards were getting more difficult to maintain. Twitter has not replied to the BBC's request for comment. Ambulance strikes due to take place in England today and on Wednesday have been called off. The Unite union suspended the industrial action to enter pay talks with the government. It followed the Unison and GMB unions earlier suspending walkouts after what they called a huge shift in the government's position. Toblerone is to remove the Matterhorn mountain peak from its packaging when some of the chocolate's production is moved from Switzerland to Slovakia. US firm Mondelez said the image of the mountain will be replaced by a more generic summit. Strict rules have applied about Swiss national symbols since 2017. Now, here in the UK, you are, I'm sure, more than aware of the empty shelves in supermarkets due to the current ongoing vegetable shortage. The government's food czar, who's also the co-founder of Leon, blamed weird supermarket culture for the crisis. This is Henry Dimbleby, who said fixed price contracts between supermarkets and suppliers meant that when food is scarce, some producers sell less to the UK and more elsewhere in Europe. But the British Retail Consortium responded by saying supermarkets needed to adapt to volatile market conditions. Well, let's talk this through with Sunaina Sinha-Haldeya, who's Global Head of Private Capital at Raymond James. Sunaina, good morning to you. It sounds like he said, she said, doesn't it? You know, who's at fault here when it comes to the fact that we can't get hold of tomatoes at the moment?
Indeed. Good morning to you, and thank you for having me. You know, this is a classic example of some of the policies and practices that prevailed and actually worked for our economy in the pre-pandemic, pre-Ukraine era, if you will, no longer work for us today. The UK is one of the only countries in Europe, and if you compare us to the United States and Australia, we stand alone in having so many fixed price contracts between supermarkets and suppliers. Letting those fixed price contracts move to what we call marginal agreements or variable free market-based agreements will allow suppliers to sell to a supermarket which may pay a higher price for its goods than saying, hey, listen, I have a shortage right now. It's really hard to come by lettuce, for example. I'll sell it to a supermarket in France or Germany because they're paying a higher price than my fixed term one in the UK.
But this current crisis has really shone a light on this and our system and how things operate in the UK. And surely supermarkets and suppliers are having to reassess their processes.
Indeed, one would hope that this is a reassessment process that can unfold rather quickly. However, markets are markets. If a supermarket is not able to pay higher prices, then the supplier will simply sell to someone that is. And until this course corrects rather quickly, this quirk will enable a number of us consumers to simply have to wait it out until the supply of said produce comes back to quote-unquote normal levels so UK supermarkets can be stocked with them. The clever supermarkets, the ones that understand how these forces work, are doing away with fixed price agreements, but the vast majority are still stuck in them.
I know, I was going to say that Henry Dimbleby, who advises the government on food strategy in England, is saying market failure. It's as simple as that. It is not working and therefore needs to be fixed. And really, to what extent can the government get involved in that, if it were to?
Well, this is out of the government's hands. This is in supermarkets' control rather than government control. This isn't something government can legislate on. However, we are the ones paying the price as consumers with shortages. Food inflation in the UK is nearly 17%, 16.7% in the year through January. So it's at sustainable highs. And as we look at inflation coming down through the year, and that's very much the hope and the plan of the Bank of England, food inflation, grocery inflation still remains very elevated.
All right, Sunaina, we will discuss this again, I'm sure, you never know, on another morning. Thanks for getting up early. Sunaina Sinha-Haldeya there from Raymond James. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come, double trouble. We'll tell you about the twins who plan to mix it with the heavyweights by shaking up the UK's premium drinks industry.
The numbers of dead and wounded defied belief. This, the worst terrorist atrocity on European soil in modern times.
In less than 24 hours, then, the Soviet Union lost an elderly sick leader and replaced him with a dynamic figure 20 years his junior.
We heard these gunshots in the gym, then he came out through a fire exit and started firing at our huts, and God, we were all petrified.
James Earl Ray, aged 41, sentenced to 99 years and due for parole when he's 90, travelled from Memphis jail to Nashville State Prison in an 8-car convoy.
Paul, what's it feel like to be married at last?
It feels fine, thank you.
What are you going to do now? Is it going to change your life much, do you think?
I don't know really, I've never been married before.
Hello again, this is BBC News. Let's remind you of the top stories. A BBC investigation uncovers evidence that Twitter is no longer able to protect users from trolling following changes under Elon Musk. There have been clashes between Greek police and protesters. Angry at last week's fatal train crash, the Prime Minister has asked for forgiveness. Now, the trade war between the US and China is still brewing, with Washington ramping up the pressure on a number of Chinese tech giants. 2 US senators have announced plans to introduce legislation this week, which will enable the US to limit firms such as TikTok over security concerns. Well, let's go live to our Asia business hub. Joao da Silva is there. Joao, what is the latest?
Well, what's significant about this is that this is a bipartisan initiative. Senator Mark Warner, who's a member of the Democratic Party, is working together with Republican Senator John Thune to introduce this bill that would allow the US president to ban or prohibit foreign technology products, including TikTok. Now, on US television, Senator Warner said that he's not just worried about the data of American TikTok users, he's worried that TikTok could be used as a propaganda tool. Now, that's significant because TikTok is used by more than 100 million people in the US, and its popularity is only growing in the US and around the world. Now, TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance, and under Chinese law, every organization, every citizen needs to assist the government in its intelligence efforts. So within this climate of growing distrust between the US and China, it's really no surprise that calls to ban TikTok are only growing louder. Last week, the House Foreign Affairs Committee voted for a bill allowing the US president to ban TikTok. That bill has, of course, to go before a full House and eventually before the Senate. And the White House told federal agencies that they need to ensure that TikTok is removed from all government phones, all government devices within 30 days. And in a sign that this momentum against TikTok is growing, not just in the US, but globally as well, similar measures have been introduced by the Canadian government and by the institutions of the European Union.
OK, Joao, thank you for that update on that story. Now, twins, not that common. Twins who are business partners, well, that's even rarer still. And we've been catching up with 2 Dutch sisters who've started a drinks business in the UK, who reckon twins make a unique and powerful combination in business. So let's take a look at their combined venture.
Doing business as twins is a very powerful thing. I think it's such a great thing to have your sister as a co-founder, because your highs are so much higher and the lows are so much less low. Because if somebody is a bit down or stressed at work, then the other one is always the optimistic one, and there's always one that has the glass a bit more fuller. We have a really special emotional bond, which makes working together very easy and very efficient. For example, in meetings, we know each other inside out, so we kind of know what we're thinking. Even as little kids, we always dreamt and talked about having our own business together with the two of us, and I couldn't be more gladder, and our parents couldn't be more proud that we actually did so.
We wish them all the very best. Now, here in the UK, Budget Day is approaching. There's much speculation about what the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will deliver to help households through the cost of living crisis. Among the giveaways, he's expected to extend the energy price guarantee at current levels for a further 3 months. Mr Hunt will deliver his budget on the 15th of March, when the extension is expected to be announced. Typical household energy bills were scheduled to rise to £3,000 a year from the beginning of April, but calls have been made for the government to retain its current level of support, with the cap at £2,500. Well, let's talk this through with Anika Gupta, who's Director of Research at the asset management firm Wisdom Tree. Good morning to you. So are you with the many out there who believe that this is one thing the Chancellor will be announcing on the 15th of March?
Well, very good morning to you, Sally. I think we've had relatively a relatively favourable period right now with gas prices coming off, and some of that pressure actually helping the government. But the reality is those risks have not gone out completely. While we are sitting at inventory levels which are much higher than the prior 5-year period, if you look back in time. The reality is there are still risks looming there. We could get unfavorable weather again, resulting in a rise in demand. We haven't completely weaned ourselves off Russian natural gas resources. And there's also the very big swing factor of China reopening, which could also, result in fairly competitive demand for energy sources.
So if we look at why the Institute for Fiscal Studies, for example, says, yes, the government could afford to do this. It could afford to continue to cap people's bills at £2,500 for a further 3 months. It's because the price of energy has fallen sharply in recent weeks, hasn't it? And some of the reasons why is because the winter's not been as cold as perhaps was feared, and also because in much of Europe, they actually were able to store an awful lot of energy in advance, weren't they?
You're absolutely right, Sally. It's been a multiple of reasons. The weather was in our favour. I think the other very important factor is a lot of prudent management of resources. I think Europe as a whole, decided on rationing its energy demand by 15%, and they actually stuck to that goal, which again contributed to more prudent management of their energy resources. We also had, demand coming off quite considerably in other sectors of non-energy intensive parts of the industry. We also saw households, be quite cautious in their usage of energy, and I think all of these factors really did contribute to better management of their energy demand over the course of the winter. But we've also seen a lot of switching of sources of energy, so away from oil and fossil fuels, more towards coal, and so that you'll see a large spike in the increase of coal usage as opposed to oil and gas. And I think that also relieved some of the pressure on the more oil-intensive industries.
But from the point of view of the government, it could be argued with the outlook for the UK economy. I mean, inflation is still double-digit. Food prices are still soaring much higher. Households are finding it very difficult. It would be extremely hard for households, for many, if their energy bills was to jump to £3,000 from April, beginning of April. Do you think the pressure is enough on the government to help?
Absolutely. Households in the UK are getting pressurized from all three fronts, be it your normal bills coming out, you're being pressurized with higher energy costs. So I think it's going to be very difficult and a very tough decision for the government if they actually decide against actually keeping the cap on. And I think that given the pressure that households are actually facing at this current point in time with such high inflation levels, we've just seen a slight dip from about 10.7 to 10.1%. It still is exorbitantly high. They do need to provide households in the UK some protection on these rising bills that they're facing.
Okay. Anika, good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. Anika Gupta there from Wisdom Tree. Well, let's briefly show you financial markets in Asia. Of course, they've been trading. Their trading day is almost over. And as you can see, a big bounce for Japan's Nikkei 225, up over 1%. This follows on from the US on Friday, where you saw stocks rising by their biggest one-day margin in at least a month, helping the S&P 500 to conclude a 3-week losing streak. So really, Asia following on from what we're seeing on Wall Street and not too perturbed by the news from China about its GDP target for this year. So you're up to date now on all things business, news and sport. I'll see you soon.
Hello. After a grey weekend, more of you will see a little bit of sunshine in the days ahead, but it'll come at a price. It's going to turn much colder out there and for some distinctly wintry. Risk of some disruptive snowfall across north and east of Scotland on Monday, and by Tuesday that extends into the northeast of England too. Sudden reductions in visibility and the snow could be mounting up in areas. Those at greatest risk marked here, up to 20 centimetres of snow in the far north of Scotland, but there could be the odd flurry elsewhere. And it all begins now. This weather front is bringing about the change, opening the door to those Arctic winds, pushing into northern Scotland for the start of Monday. Frequent snow showers around. A dividing line is there across into Northern Ireland and northern parts of England first thing. Rain or drizzle, lots of cloud on that, turning to sleet and snow on its back edge as it works its way southwards, but with some sunshine. Frequent snow showers in northern Scotland, temperatures dropping barely above freezing by the end of the day. But through Wales, the Midlands, southern England, it's as you were. Temperatures similar to the weekend, plenty of cloud, just 1 or 2 sunny breaks. Here into the evening, though, we'll see some outbreaks of rain or drizzle as our weather front drifts its way south. There could be some sleet and snow for a time, not just on the hills. In its wake, icy conditions for Tuesday morning as temperatures drop quite widely, widespread frost away from the south, and frequent snow showers the north coast of Northern Ireland, far north of Scotland, and down through some eastern counties of England. Odd one elsewhere can't be ruled out, but a cold day for all. This is what it will feel like, sub-zero for many through the bulk of the day. And what will follow will be a particularly chilly night. Temperatures into minus double digits as we go into Wednesday morning, where the snow is lying across parts of northern Scotland. From there on, though, it gets a bit complicated because we've got Atlantic air trying to work its way back, fighting against that Arctic air. On the northern edge of that, we could see some snow, and that's dependent on wriggles of weather fronts and pushing in areas of low pressure. Certainly for Wednesday, there is a chance we could see some snow across southernmost counties of England if that weather front gets close by, easing through the day before returning into the night towards the southwest. Many, though, further north will see some dry and sunny weather continue. It will still be cold, but then through the end of the week, it's just how quickly that boundary pushes northwards. There is a potential, particularly through Friday into the weekend, of some more disruptive snowfall before things turn milder and wetter across the south. Take care.